The countdown continues in Vote 2024, and we're much closer to any kind of October surprise in the final weeks of the high-stakes contest. That's catching the attention even of lawmakers who aren't on the ballot this time around.
Politicians have put their own political ambitions, their own fears, in some cases ahead of the people that we were sent here to represent.
Georgia's U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock will join us from Washington. He's talking about his policy proposals, his concerns for the country in this election cycle, and why he says we have to redeem democracy. Plus, how prepared is the Sunshine State for Election Day? Florida's Secretary of State Cord Byrd explains where the process stands and an ongoing investigation his office is involved in on This Week in Jacksonville. And thank you so much for joining us today. As of Sunday, September 29th, there are only 36 days remaining until the general election. And Florida has turned much more red over the past few cycles, but Georgia remains a critical swing state in the Electoral College math. Joining us for the first time on our program, United States Senator Raphael Warnock, Reverend Raphael Warnock, elected Georgia's first black senator in 2021, reelected to a full 6-year term in December 22. And Senator, in these 3.5 years, did you have any idea it would be as consequential, as tumultuous, as much of a roller coaster as we've seen in the nation since you got elected?
Well, thank you so very much. Good to talk to your viewers. I can tell you that serving in the United States Senate is the honor of my life. It's a wonderful thing when the people of your state say that as we take stock of our lives, look at our hopes and dreams for our children, consider our aging parents as they deal with both the blessings and the burdens of getting old, that we're going to send you to Washington, and we're going to trust that in rooms of power where decisions are made, you're going to be thinking about ordinary folks. And so it's been an incredible ride for me these first 3 years. It has been a tumultuous time, but for me, it's worth it. It gives me an opportunity to do what I've tried to do my entire life, serve.
Well, Vice President Kamala Harris, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, they started campaigning together in Georgia right after the DNC. So talk with me a little bit about the nature of Georgia. It is a critical swing state. And I know in South Georgia, a region that typically leans Republican, but this is where you had success in that 2022 Senate runoff. Is this going to be a key to who serves in the White House?
I can tell you that Georgia is very much in play. Both sides know it. That's why they keep coming back and forth to Georgia. The vice president has been to Georgia several times, not just in Atlanta, but down in Savannah, in the southern part of the state where I'm from. And here's what she's got working for her. She's centering ordinary people. She's Kamala Harris for the people, as she's been her entire life. And the contrast between these two candidates could not be more stark. I think the momentum is with us, but we've got to leave it all on the field and help folks to see the work that she's already done and the work that she is continuing to do as she's put forward an incredible bill to deal with our crisis around housing that would bring 3 million more new homes online, as she's focused on capping the cost of prescription drugs. We've done a lot of great work in that area already, and still there's more work to do as she centers people. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is focused on himself. And so we ought to leave him to himself, to focus on himself. And we have an opportunity to do that come November 5th and elect somebody who's going to be focused on the people.
Senator Donald Trump held an event in Savannah this past Tuesday, and among other things, the former president said that if he's reelected, America's going to take other countries' jobs. What is the big difference or distinction between these two candidates in your mind? And obviously we know that you're supporting the Democratic nominee here, but you also came into the Senate just as President Trump was leaving office.
Donald Trump has never been focused on anybody but himself. I mean, he's been consistent in that regard. And in the same way in which he was more than willing to stiff ordinary struggling people in his work as a businessman. He didn't mind trashing our democracy in order to hold on to this idea that somehow he had won an election that he'd lost. I think as you look at the issues confronting our country, we need somebody who's going to be focused on ordinary people. Kamala Harris has been there. She was there casting the deciding vote for my bill that capped the cost of prescription drugs, that capped the cost of insulin to no more than $35 of out-of-pocket costs for ordinary folks. She was there as we passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill where Donald Trump talked about infrastructure, never did anything about it. As we have strengthened American manufacturing through the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is work that she will continue to build on in the years ahead.
Senator, let me ask about this. It's kind of a state issue with some national implications here. Georgia State Election Board has been meeting, and they approved a controversial hand counting rule on Election Day. The Office of Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr, who's a Republican, says that several of these proposed rules just aren't likely going to make it, that they're in conflict with existing state election law. What do you see happening here? Again, you just referenced it. Donald Trump 4 years ago said that Georgia was a key to why he didn't win an election that he thought he won.
Well, we all remember that infamous phone call where Donald Trump literally called into Georgia and said to Georgia officials, can you find me 11,780 votes? What the State Board of Elections led by these MAGA Republicans is trying to do is set a scenario under which what he wasn't able to do the last time, he could do this time. And so we have to be vigilant. We will take whatever legal recourse that is necessary to address this, but also we'll be focused on turning our people out. I think the bigger the margin of our win, the harder it is for folks to cheat and to play games. But I want the American people to think about this. This is part of what could not make the contrast more stark. These board members, by the way, showed up to a Trump rally, and I would have the same condemnation if they were Democrats and the shoe were on the other foot. They literally showed up to a Trump rally, a couple of them, and they were singled out by Donald Trump. They were called bulldogs. In other words, folks who were doing his partisan bidding. That's not what we need in a nonpartisan board of elections. They should be virtually invisible. People should barely know that they even exist because they're supposed to just carry out and administer the elections. Instead, they've gotten involved in a way that undermines our democracy. We're seeing this in so many ways all across our country, which is why we've got to elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. We've got to maintain our majority in the Senate. We've got to flip the House, and we've got to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act so that we can have protection from just these kinds of shenanigans.
Senator Warnock, I want to hear about some policy stuff. So Senator Warnock's going to stay with us. We're going to talk about some of those policy efforts surrounding economic opportunity as well. So stay with us. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And U.S. Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock is with us today, joining us by Zoom from Washington, D.C. Senator, I'd like to talk about two of your policy proposals. The first one, American Housing and Economic Mobility Act. I know this is an investment of like $500 billion. And when we hear about affordable housing, this is an issue not just in Florida or Georgia. This seems to be everywhere in the country. What would this act do?
Well, we have a serious housing crisis in our country, and it's been going on a very long time. And what this piece of legislation will do is it will address the supply side. And as a result of increasing supply, the folks who have done the research and looked at this say that it will drive the price of rent down by about 10%. It will bring more housing online. And we all know that housing is security, housing is safety, housing is dignity. And I look forward to getting this piece of legislation across the line.
Yeah, is it something you feel like there's support to be able to do that in the Senate and then with the House?
There is a recognition in the Congress that we have a housing crisis. So I look forward to that conversation. We have a real problem all across Georgia. And you know, in the Atlanta area alone, I think the housing supply literally went down by about 7%. Part of what this bill will do is it will address the outsized influence of private equity in the housing market, the ways in which folks in that sector of private equity are swooping in, buying huge swaths of the marketplace in many of our cities away from ordinary buyers, driving the price up and the supply down. And so this bill looks to address this in a systemic way. In addition to that, I've got legislation that gives people support for their down payment in order to become first-time homeowners, often first-generation homeowners, as was I. This is work that's so critically important. It's about the American dream.
Well, it is that home ownership, a path to home ownership is so important to that American dream. So is your employment. And I know you've got the Pathways to Prosperity Act you're working on here. And this is really kind of connecting employers who want to hire workers for jobs that often only require a technical or community college degree, but the local workforce isn't always ready to go with that. How would this Pathways to Prosperity Act work?
So while I attended a four-year college and went on to get graduate degrees, can I tell you I am a big champion and cheerleader for community and technical colleges. I think that they are an underutilized resource in our country. When you look at the workforce of the future and the jobs that are actually needed, we really need to lean into bolstering and strengthening our community and technical colleges. And so I have a bipartisan piece of legislation along with Senator Braun of Indiana that will provide competitive grants for community and technical colleges to create a more direct pathway, if you will, from their curricula in their schools to placing their young people in jobs. And so this means enhancing and expanding their curriculum in such a way that they are connected to real opportunity in their own community. There are examples of this already, but we're looking to revise what had been a federal program of years ago, and it sort of died out. We're bringing it back, enhancing it, and creating a pathway to prosperity.
Yeah,
a job is dignity.
I love the title, right? I mean, I love the ideas encapsulated just in the title of the act there. Senator, before we go, and I hate to end on a down note, but this is just weeks after that shooting at Appalachia High School. And I know that the Barrow County Sheriff's Office released an incident report. It's given some new details about what happened there. But the school reopens this coming Tuesday, and that's something the sheriff calls a huge step for us healing. How do you feel about seeing law enforcement arrest both the alleged shooter, a 14-year-old, and his father, and what can we do to see that not happen again?
It's heart-wrenching and it's heartbreaking, and it's deeply frustrating and maddening because we don't have to live this way. This idea that we can't do anything about this, that's not what it means to be an American. Of course we can fix this. We're the only nation where you have these mass shootings, not only in schools, but malls, salons, other places as a regular part of life. We ought to do what most of the American people want us to do, and that is put forward universal background checks. Republicans and Democrats want that. And yet we can't have a debate about it in Congress because of the gun lobby. So we've got to give the people their voices back. I can tell you that I went to Winder, Georgia right after this happened. I stood in an open green field. It was light, fresh rain dropping on a Friday night, and I thought to myself, we should be here at a football game. These kids should be cheering on their classmates. Instead, they were there mourning their classmates. I can tell you as a father, as a pastor, as a public servant, I think it's high time for us to get together, pass bipartisan legislation, and ensure that our children are safe. If we can't do that, then we have failed miserably.
Yeah, and regardless of what the solution is, I think every American would say, let's end this. Let's get to a place where it doesn't happen again. Senator Warnock, what a pleasure to get to meet you. Thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Deeply honored. Thank you.
All right, everybody else, stay with us. We're going to dive into the latest election information in Florida. My interview with Secretary of State Cord Byrd next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
As we move closer to November's general election, every state has a process for preparing. I recently sat down with the top elections official in Florida, Cord Bird. I asked the Secretary of State how he feels about getting ready for Election Day.
We feel prepared, and that's a great thing. Military and overseas ballots have gone out, so Floridians are in the process of starting to vote. October 7th is the book close deadline, which means anybody who wants to register to vote for this election needs to be registered by October 7th.
In the past, years past, Florida has kind of been a battleground of, hey, things didn't go well in an election. How are you feeling about that? Because over the years that you've been Secretary of State here, there have been some changes. And you said, hey, security is really important to me. The integrity of our vote is really important. How do you feel about where you stand for the state?
I feel great about where Florida is. I mean, we have come a long way since 2000, and because we've had that experience and been getting this right for the last 24 years, Florida doesn't have the problems that other states see. So my number one priority as Secretary of State is to have the cleanest voter rolls that we possibly can have. So we have about 13.5 million registered voters, and I want them to know that they can trust the process in Florida.
The news recently in Duval County was, hey, we've got, I think the number was like 90,000 inactive voters. Is that something that you want to see throughout all the counties in Florida? Hey, let's make sure that how did you put it, the rolls are clean?
Correct. So since 2022, Florida supervisors of elections have moved to either removed from the rolls or moved to inactive 1 million people. So because if you want to have a clean election, you really have to have clean voter rolls. So we're going to know by October 7th, the electorate will be set for this election. So we take that process really seriously, because you got to get it right on the right on the front end. You can't try to fix it on the back end.
Yeah, I know it's a delicate matter, but I'm going to ask you about Georgia. We just in the last week or so, we've seen some of the confusion there, the controversy there, because lawmakers are saying, hey, let's make some changes. That's got to be really tough that close to Election Day. How do you feel about what's going on there, and how is it different than what Florida gets to go through in these next few days?
That's what Florida gets right. We don't ever rest on our laurels. And even though we had a successful election in 2020, the Florida legislature and the governor in 3 successive legislative sessions passed meaningful election integrity reform, because it takes time to get supervisors trained, to get poll workers trained, to get candidates and campaigns trained. So you don't really want to make massive changes to your voting process this close to an election. So we're not doing that here in Florida.
I'm sure it's important to you and other folks in a role like you have to say, hey, this is not partisan. We're not going to be party driven. But you're a Republican, and many Democrats have said, hey, Florida's not doing everything it can for voter access, and they're taking away access. How would you respond to folks who might criticize that element of what Florida's doing?
We make it incredibly easy for people to register to vote in Florida, to have access to the polls. We have 3 ways people can vote: vote by mail, early voting, and Election Day. And it doesn't matter party. It's a third of how voters choose to vote. You can register to vote at your supervisors of elections office. We have online voter registration. You can go to your local library. So we make it incredibly easy in the state of Florida.
We know there are 6 constitutional amendments on the ballot in the state of Florida this year, but Amendment 4, while an important issue in itself, has kind of come up in conversation and in the news because there's a claim that, hey, one of the Florida departments here is actually promoting how to vote on this amendment. You're doing an investigation, is that right?
We are currently conducting an investigation into these initiative petition drives, and this was in our report that we're required to give to the legislature back in January, and that went to the governor as well. So this isn't anything new. It's an investigation we've been conducting since last year, and what we found is that there are over 100 individuals that we've identified that were out collecting these petitions that had a substantial number of fraudulent submissions. One individual alone had over 80% of the petitions that they turned in that were rejected. We've had workers in election offices who identified their own name and false signature on these petitions. So we have a duty and obligation under the law to investigate, and that's what we're doing.
When would that be completed, or how would that affect? Would it affect this particular election, or is it something because of an investigation that goes beyond November 5th?
The investigation is ongoing, and we're following leads. I mean, people are being interviewed. We're gaining new information and intelligence every day. But it's serious. I mean, there are victims. There are individuals who had their personal identifying information stolen. There are victims of felony identity theft. And we have an obligation, and we're going to do that investigation and inform the people.
Now, I asked the Secretary specifically about the controversy over Florida's Agency for Healthcare Administration and the abortion amendment. Mr. Byrd said it's not in his jurisdiction, so he didn't want to comment on it. Hey, we're planning something special here on News 4 Jax. We're going to host a forum on Amendment 3. That's when Florida voters can decide if recreational marijuana should be legal in the state. Wednesday, October 9th, 8 p.m., we are partnering with Jacksonville University and WBOB Radio. Ed Dean will moderate that discussion with me. You will be able to watch on TV, streaming on News 4 Jax Plus or online. It'll also be live on the radio. And this is a statewide event that we're holding here in Jacksonville. All right, Jacksonville Mayor Donna Deegan is with us next time. I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 and the CW17, and of course online at news4jax.com or streaming on News 4 Jax Plus. And don't forget to check out This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. This week's episode looks at the Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville getting ready to celebrate and hand out awards this coming Friday. You can find new episodes every Thursday at 9 a.m. and you'll find it right now on News 4 Jax Plus under the channel This Week in Jacksonville. You'll also find This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition available wherever you find your podcast, like Apple, Spotify, or Google.
Every day, more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.